Have you ever noticed that certain people seem to repel toxic individuals without saying a word? They carry themselves with a quiet strength that makes manipulators, energy vampires, and negative people naturally stay away from them. These aren't people who are aggressive or confrontational. Quite the opposite. They've mastered the art of creating invisible boundaries that protect their peace and energy. Today, I'm going to reveal 8 silent habits rooted in Stoic wisdom that will transform you into someone toxic people instinctively avoid. These aren't about being mean or antisocial. They're about developing such strong inner character that people with bad intentions can sense they won't be able to manipulate or drain you. By the end of this video, you'll understand how to develop an aura of strength that naturally repels those who would harm you, while attracting people who genuinely respect and value what you bring to their lives. Most importantly, you'll learn to do this without drama, confrontation, or having to explain yourself to anyone. But before we dive into these powerful habits, let me tell you a story about a Roman senator named Cato the Younger. In a time of widespread corruption in Rome, Cato never had to announce his integrity or make speeches about his values. His mere presence in a room was enough to make corrupt politicians uncomfortable. They would change their behavior, tone down their schemes, or sometimes even leave entirely when he arrived. When someone asked Cato how he managed to have such influence without ever raising his voice or making threats, he simply replied, "When you truly embody your principles, you don't need to advertise them. The unprincipled will sense the difference and either change their behavior or remove themselves from your presence." This is the power we're going to develop today, not through aggression or manipulation, but through the cultivation of authentic inner strength that speaks louder than words. If you find value in this content, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can continue receiving practical wisdom that transforms lives. Let's begin. Habit 1. They master the art of strategic silence. The first habit that makes toxic people uncomfortable around certain individuals is their mastery of strategic silence. This isn't about being antisocial or rude. It's about understanding the profound power of not feeding into drama, not defending yourself against every criticism, and not explaining your choices to people who haven't earned that level of access to your inner world. Toxic people thrive on reaction. They feed off emotional responses, defensiveness, and the need to be right. When you master strategic silence, you remove their primary source of satisfaction from interacting with you. It's like taking away a manipulator's favorite tool. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about the power of choosing when to speak and when to remain silent. He understood that silence could be more powerful than the most eloquent speech when used strategically. This doesn't mean becoming a doormat or avoiding all conflict. It means choosing your battles wisely and not giving your energy to every provocation. When someone makes a passive-aggressive comment, instead of immediately defending yourself or engaging in their drama, you simply acknowledge what they said with a calm, "I see," or interesting perspective, and then redirect the conversation or remove yourself from it entirely. This response is so unexpected that it often leaves toxic people confused and frustrated. The key is that your silence comes from a place of strength, not weakness. You're not avoiding confrontation because you're afraid. You're choosing not to engage because you recognize that your energy is too valuable to waste on people who aren't interested in genuine communication. Practice this by identifying the people in your life who consistently try to bait you into arguments or drama. Instead of taking the bait, experiment with responding with calm, brief acknowledgements, followed by subject changes or polite exits from the conversation. Habit 2. They maintain unwavering emotional stability. The second habit that makes toxic people avoid certain individuals is their unwavering emotional stability. Toxic people are like emotional storms. They create chaos and then feed off the chaos they've created. When they encounter someone who remains calm in the center of their storm, they lose their power and often move on to easier targets. Emotional stability doesn't mean never feeling emotions. It means not allowing your emotions to control your actions or responses. Stoics understood that we cannot always control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond to what happens to us. Epictetus, who experienced tremendous hardship as a slave before becoming a philosopher, taught that our emotional reactions are within our control. When someone insults you, it's not the insult itself that causes emotional pain. It's your judgment about the insult and the meaning you assign to it. People with this habit have trained themselves to pause between stimulus and response. When someone tries to provoke them, instead of reacting immediately, they take a moment to choose their response consciously. This pause drives toxic people crazy because they can't predict or manipulate your reactions. Imagine someone at work trying to undermine you in a meeting by making a sarcastic comment about your project. Instead of getting defensive or angry, you simply maintain your composure and respond with something like, "Thank you for your feedback. Let me address the main points of concern," and then calmly present your information. This response not only maintains your professionalism, but also makes the other person's behavior look petty and unprofessional by contrast. Toxic people avoid emotionally stable individuals because they can't create the drama they crave. They can't push your buttons if you've learned to disconnect your emotional responses from their actions. Develop this habit by practicing the pause. When you feel yourself beginning to react emotionally to someone's behavior, take 3 deep breaths before responding. Ask yourself, what response would serve me best in this situation, rather than how can I make this person understand they're wrong. Habit 3. They set crystal clear boundaries without explanation. The third habit that makes toxic people uncomfortable is the ability to set crystal clear boundaries without feeling the need to justify or explain them. Most people exhaust themselves trying to make boundary violators understand why their boundaries exist. People with this habit understand that boundaries aren't up for negotiation or debate. Seneca wrote about the importance of protecting your time and energy as you would protect your most valuable possessions. He understood that saying yes to everything means saying no to what truly matters. People who master this habit treat their time, energy, and peace of mind as precious resources that must be carefully guarded. When someone asks these individuals to do something that violates their boundaries, they don't launch into lengthy explanations about why they can't or shouldn't do it. They simply say, "No, I'm not available for that," or "That doesn't work for me," and then change the subject or end the conversation if necessary. This drives toxic people crazy because they're used to people who over-explain their decisions, giving them opportunities to argue, manipulate, or guilt-trip them into changing their minds. When you simply state your boundary and refuse to debate it, you remove their ability to manipulate the situation. For example, if someone consistently calls you late at night to dump their problems on you, instead of explaining why this bothers you or trying to make them understand how it affects your sleep, you simply stop answering calls after a certain time. If they ask why you didn't answer, you might say, "I don't take calls after 9 p.m. without further explanation. The key is that you set these boundaries based on your values and needs, not on what others think is reasonable. You don't need anyone's permission to protect your peace, and you don't owe anyone an explanation for doing so. Toxic people avoid individuals with strong boundaries because they know they won't be able to take advantage of them. They prefer people who negotiate their own boundaries or who feel guilty for having them in the first place. Start implementing this habit by identifying one area where you consistently allow others to violate your boundaries. Choose one specific boundary to enforce and practice stating it clearly without explanation when it's challenged. Habit 4. They focus intensely on their own growth and goals. The fourth habit that repels toxic people is an intense focus on personal growth and meaningful goals. Toxic people thrive when they can make themselves the center of attention through drama, complaints, or crisis. When they encounter someone who is genuinely focused on their own development and progress, they find it difficult to redirect that person's attention to their problems. Marcus Aurelius consistently focused on becoming a better person each day. Even as emperor, he spent time each morning reflecting on how he could improve his character, and each evening reviewing his actions and decisions. This self-focus wasn't selfish. It was the foundation that allowed him to serve others more effectively. People with this habit have learned to redirect conversations away from gossip, complaints, and drama toward topics that actually matter: personal development, meaningful projects, learning opportunities, and positive future plans. When someone tries to engage them in negative talk about others, they respond with something like, "I prefer not to discuss other people," and then shift to a more constructive topic. This habit makes toxic people uncomfortable because they can't drag you into their world of negativity and stagnation. They realize that spending time with you won't feed their need for drama or validation for their victim mentality. Instead, your focus on growth and improvement might actually challenge them to examine their own choices, which is the last thing they want to do. For instance, when a colleague tries to involve you in office gossip about another co-worker instead of engaging, you might say, "I haven't noticed that about Sarah. Speaking of work, I've been learning some new techniques that might help with our upcoming project," and then redirect the conversation to something productive. Your consistent focus on growth and positive topics creates an environment where toxic behavior feels out of place. People who thrive on negativity will naturally gravitate toward others who are willing to participate in their complaints and drama. Develop this habit by creating specific goals for different areas of your life and regularly reviewing your progress. When conversations turn negative, practice redirecting them toward topics related to growth, learning, or positive future plans. Habit 5. They practice selective availability and energy management. The fifth habit that makes toxic people avoid certain individuals is their practice of selective availability and careful energy management. These people understand that their time and energy are finite resources that must be invested wisely, not distributed equally to everyone who demands them. Epictetus taught that we must be guardians of our own resources, our time, attention, and emotional energy. Just as you wouldn't give your money to everyone who asked for it, you shouldn't give your time and energy to everyone who demands it. People with this habit have learned to be strategic about where they invest themselves. This doesn't mean being selfish or uncaring. It means recognizing that you can better serve the people and causes that truly matter when you're not constantly drained by those who take without giving back. They understand the difference between supporting someone through a genuine crisis and enabling someone's chronic dysfunction. When toxic people realize they can't access you whenever they want, however they want, they often move on to more available targets. They prefer people who are always accessible, who drop everything when they call, and who prioritize their needs over their own well-being. For example, if someone has a pattern of creating emergencies that always seem to require your immediate attention, you might start responding with, "I can talk about this tomorrow during my lunch break," rather than dropping everything to manage their crisis. This teaches them that your availability has boundaries and that their poor planning doesn't constitute an emergency on your part. People with this habit often have specific times when they're available for different types of interactions. They might have office hours for work-related discussions, designated times for returning personal calls, and protected time for their own projects and self-care. Toxic people find this frustrating because they're used to people who are always on call for their needs. They prefer relationships where they can interrupt, demand immediate attention, and expect others to prioritize their wants over everything else. Implement this habit by creating specific times for different types of availability and communicating these boundaries clearly. Practice saying, "I'm not available right now, but I can discuss this at specific time," instead of immediately accommodating every request for your time and attention. Habit 6. They respond to manipulation with facts, not emotions. The sixth habit that makes toxic people uncomfortable is the ability to respond to manipulation attempts with calm facts rather than emotional reactions. Manipulators rely on triggering emotional responses that cloud judgment and make their targets more susceptible to guilt, fear, or anger-based compliance. Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of responding to situations based on reason rather than passion. He understood that emotional reactions often lead to poor decisions and give others power over our mental state. People who master this habit have trained themselves to recognize manipulation tactics and respond with logical, fact-based communication. When someone tries to guilt-trip them, they don't defend their emotions or get drawn into an argument about feelings. Instead, they might respond with something like, "I understand you're disappointed. Let me clarify the facts of the situation," and then calmly present the actual information without emotional coloring. This approach is incredibly effective because manipulators depend on emotional confusion to succeed. When you respond with clear, factual communication, you force the conversation back to reality rather than the emotionally charged alternate version they're trying to create. For instance, if someone says, "You obviously don't care about me because you won't lend me money," instead of defending your feelings or getting into an argument about how much you care, you might respond with, "I care about you, which is why I'm not comfortable enabling financial irresponsibility. My policy is not to lend money to friends or family." This response acknowledges their feelings without accepting the manipulative premise, states the facts clearly, and establishes a boundary based on principle rather than emotion. It's very difficult for manipulators to argue with this type of response because it doesn't give them the emotional hooks they need to continue their manipulation. Toxic people avoid individuals who consistently respond this way because their manipulation tactics simply don't work. They prefer people who get caught up in emotional arguments and who can be made to feel guilty, afraid, or angry enough to comply with their demands. Develop this habit by learning to recognize common manipulation tactics: guilt-tripping, gaslighting, emotional blackmail, and false urgency. Practice responding to these tactics by first taking a pause to identify the facts of the situation, then responding based on those facts rather than the emotions being triggered. Habit 7. They maintain their values, regardless of social pressure. The seventh habit that repels toxic people is the unwavering commitment to personal values, regardless of social pressure or potential consequences. Toxic individuals often try to pressure others into compromising their principles through peer pressure, ridicule, or social exclusion. People with this habit cannot be moved from their core values by external pressure. Cato the Younger was famous for this quality. Even when maintaining his principles cost him politically or socially, he never compromised what he believed was right. This consistency made him someone that corrupt individuals couldn't work with or manipulate, so they generally avoided him altogether. This doesn't mean being rigid or refusing to consider other perspectives. It means having a clear understanding of your non-negotiable values and maintaining them even when it's difficult or unpopular. People with this habit know the difference between being flexible about methods and compromising on principles. When a group is gossiping about someone, they don't participate even if it means standing alone. When colleagues are cutting corners in ways that violate their ethics, they don't go along to get along. When friends are pressuring them to do something that contradicts their values, they politely but firmly decline. This consistency makes toxic people uncomfortable because they can't predict when you might be willing to compromise your standards to fit in or avoid conflict. They prefer people whose values are negotiable based on circumstances or social pressure. For example, if your workplace culture includes making fun of certain customers or clients, and this conflicts with your value of treating all people with respect, you simply don't participate in these conversations. You don't lecture others about their behavior, but you also don't compromise your own standards to fit in. Toxic people find this frustrating because they can't use social pressure or the fear of being excluded to manipulate your behavior. They realize that you're willing to stand alone rather than compromise your principles, which makes you an unreliable target for their schemes. Strengthen this habit by clearly identifying your core values and writing them down. Practice small acts of integrity daily, keeping your word, being honest in small matters, and maintaining your standards even when no one is watching. Habit 8. They cultivate genuine self-respect and self-worth. The 8th and final habit that makes toxic people avoid certain individuals is their cultivation of genuine self-respect and self-worth that comes from within rather than from external validation. This is perhaps the most powerful habit because it makes you immune to the approval-seeking behaviors that toxic people exploit. Marcus Aurelius understood that seeking validation from others is like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No amount of external approval will ever be enough if you don't first respect yourself. People with genuine self-worth don't need others to validate their choices, confirm their value, or approve of their decisions. This internal validation system makes you incredibly unattractive to toxic people because they typically target those who are hungry for approval, acceptance, or validation. If you don't need their approval, they have no leverage over you. If you don't fear their disapproval, they can't control you through criticism or rejection. When someone tries to make you feel bad about yourself, these individuals don't rush to defend themselves or seek reassurance. They might simply think that's an interesting perspective and continue living according to their own standards. They understand that other people's opinions of them are not their responsibility to manage. This doesn't mean being arrogant or dismissive of all feedback. It means having a strong enough sense of self that you can consider criticism objectively without your self-worth hanging in the balance. You can take useful feedback and ignore attacks on your character with equal composure. For instance, if someone says, "You think you're better than everyone else because you won't join us for drinks after work," instead of defending yourself or trying to prove you're not arrogant, you might simply respond with, "I hope you all have a great time," and continue with your plans. Toxic people are deeply frustrated by individuals who can't be manipulated through approval or disapproval. They're used to people who will change their behavior, compromise their values, or exhaust themselves trying to win approval. When they encounter someone who is genuinely comfortable with themselves, they often move on to easier targets. Build this habit by developing internal measures of success and worth rather than relying on external validation. Practice making decisions based on your own judgment rather than what others might think. Celebrate your own progress and achievements privately before sharing them with others. The compound effect of these habits. When you combine all 8 of these habits, you create what the Stoics called an inner citadel, a fortress of character that cannot be breached by external circumstances or toxic individuals. You become someone who naturally attracts healthy, positive people while repelling those who would drain your energy or compromise your peace. The beautiful thing about these habits is that they're all within your control. You don't need to wait for toxic people to change their behavior or for your circumstances to improve. You can start implementing these habits today and begin creating the invisible barriers that protect your mental and emotional well-being. Remember, the goal isn't to become cold, antisocial, or uncaring. The goal is to develop such strong inner character that people with bad intentions find it impossible to manipulate or take advantage of you. You become someone who can be genuinely kind and generous, because you're operating from a position of strength rather than weakness. These habits work because they address the fundamental dynamics that toxic people rely on: emotional reactivity, weak boundaries, approval-seeking behavior, and inconsistent values. When you eliminate these vulnerabilities, you remove the tools that toxic individuals use to create drama and maintain control over others. Implementing these habits. Start with the habit that resonates most strongly with you or addresses your biggest current challenge with toxic people. Practice it consistently for several weeks until it becomes natural, then gradually incorporate the others. Remember that developing these habits is a process, not a destination. Even the ancient Stoics viewed their philosophical practice as a lifelong journey of continuous improvement. Be patient with yourself as you develop these new patterns of thinking and behaving. The most important thing is to remain committed to your own growth and well-being. Every time you choose to implement one of these habits instead of falling back into old patterns, you're building the kind of character that naturally repels toxicity and attracts genuine respect and positive relationships. Conclusion. These 8 silent habits aren't just strategies for dealing with toxic people. They're practices that will improve every area of your life. When you develop genuine inner strength, emotional stability, clear boundaries, and authentic self-worth, you don't just repel negative influences, you become a positive influence yourself. The ancient Stoics understood that the best way to change your environment is to change yourself. When you embody these principles consistently, you create a ripple effect that influences everyone around you. Some people will be inspired to raise their own standards, while others who can't meet those standards will naturally drift away. Your peace of mind is too valuable to be held hostage by toxic individuals. Your energy is too precious to be wasted on people who don't appreciate what you bring to their lives. By implementing these habits, you reclaim your power and create the space for relationships and experiences that genuinely enrich your life. Start today with just one habit. Choose the one that speaks to you most strongly and commit to practicing it for the next week. Notice how it changes, not just how others relate to you, but how you relate to yourself. As Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength, developed through consistent practice of these habits, becomes your greatest protection against those who would disturb your peace. The toxic people in your life don't need to change for your life to improve. You just need to become someone they can no longer affect.